All right, let's talk about the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy. So imagine that you have a ranch and you're down in Texas and you maybe take a big old board and you put it out against your barn and you pull out your gun and you step however many feet away and you decide to just shoot at that board. And you shoot at the board, you kind of empty your gun, and then you go up and you notice some patterns, a concentration of places where you hit the board. And so then you go get some paint and you paint a target, a bullseye, right around the concentration where you hit the most. So it looks like you just hit the target over and over again. That's the idea of the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy. And this one shows up in our problem solving and our thinking more than we realize. But this one is pretty subtle. It is hard to recognize yourself. And so it oftentimes benefits from having some other pairs of eyes and other people who can look. And even when someone points it out to you, people can get pretty defensive, pretty protective when they're doing this. So here's how it plays out. Imagine that you are trying to solve a problem. You're trying to discover a literal or metaphorical treasure. And you're making a lot of different attempts at solving it. And your attempts can become sort of concentrated in a particular area. There's a certain theme. And you don't even consciously notice that you're putting so much of your time and your attention into this one concentrated area, but you are. And then over time, you step back and you look and you notice that you've been putting so many attempts in this area that must be the bullseye. That must be where it is. But it's actually a pattern that you created entirely yourself. It's potentially completely unrelated to the intent of the designer or to an actual solution to the problem. And that's the issue with the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy. So how do we address this? I have 5 thoughts I've jotted down that I'll walk through with you that I've found to be pretty helpful in my own thinking. But as I've mentioned before, there's a good dose of humility required because we all get stuck in these different fallacies. And I may have even fallen prey to the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy today sometime during my work, in the last 24 hours, who knows? So let's go ahead and get started. The first one is notice when you start with a feeling. And this is something that I've talked about in other videos, but when you are trying something and you're doing a lot of really careful logical thinking, there's still emotion that's involved when you're doing logical thinking and when you're trying to solve a problem. And if you're concentrating all of your effort in a certain area and you keep making all these different attempts in that area, that you may step back for a moment and you have this kind of aha moment. And it's an emotion kind of driven experience where you see the pattern. But again, it was your pattern of your own making. And it turns into this sort of emotional drive, like, that's it, I've got it. It's almost like a eureka feeling, but it's not necessarily founded in anything that's going to really lead you to the solution or the literal metaphorical treasure necessarily. It could be, might not be. Second one is write the rule before you test it. In other words, what are the criteria that would determine whether or not you're close to the target? Like, how do you actually measure this? And this is one of the problems with a lot of times people are trying to solve problems or discover treasures in the abstract, and they're just doing it without any real mechanism for testing their thinking. They're testing their thinking against their own thinking, and that's cyclical, and it doesn't really help that much. And that's why there's only so far that you can go unless you get a literal or metaphorical boots on the ground, going and trying things out, testing things, and seeing. And if you try and it's not there, that's just the beginning of the process. So don't give up there. That's just the beginning of the process. Now you're able to kind of move on, but you have to have some criteria. Like, how will you know if it's actually close to the target or not? And then you can kind of assess your attempts according to that. The second one is or I guess it's the third one now. So the first one is notice when you start with a feeling. Second one is write the rule before you test it. The third one is keep a miss list. So say you are making a lot of different attempts and you have a way of determining whether or not you're close to the target or not. Then document those, because maybe you're noticing a concentration of attempts in an area. That doesn't mean you're hitting the target. It could be that all of those are failed attempts, and maybe one of them is has a chance of being correct. But it's really good to kind of test things with a miss list. It gives you some humility and it helps insulate you a little bit from this Texas Sharpshooter fallacy that I'm talking about. The fourth one, and this is one that it's called compare against random. And I did not think this would actually work. And I still am kind of skeptical about it. And then I try it and lo and behold, it actually does, but you have to treat it seriously. So here's how it works. So say you are making a lot of different attempts in a particular area or with a certain theme, and you begin to mistake that as evidence that it has to be somewhere in that area because you're noticing your own attempts are creating sort of a concentration of shots against the board. And so how do you test this? Take some things, get some clues, or maybe even find a friend or someone who gives you some clues that are actually fake clues. They're random. They're unrelated to the actual thing you're trying to solve, and see if those fit into your pattern making as well. And if you're, and you will notice that your brain, when it's really wired to try to sort of create a solution, it will actually try to incorporate those random ideas into the solution and make them just as logical as everything else. And if you find that your brain is able to do that and capable of doing that, it's a sign that you're potentially on the wrong track. Now, I know that one seems like it might not work because your brain knows that these are fake clues, so why would it try to solve? But for some reason, it does work pretty often. And then the fifth one I'll say is define failure in advance. So a sound idea can pass or fail, but a belief can really only grow. So before you start chasing some kind of solution, name one outcome that would make you abandon it. In other words, if you like, what would it take to convince you that this isn't the right path? What would it take? And if you're finding it really, really difficult to come up with some legitimate reasons why you would abandon your potential solution or solve, you are in the kind of blind belief category more likely than you are in your sort of thinking mind, your logical thinking, problem solving mind. If you put all five of these together, it can help insulate you a little bit from the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. But in all honesty, this is a hard one to let go of. This is for some reason, for me personally, I find myself in this trap and it's really hard to get out on my own. So this is where having a friend, having some colleagues, having some other people you can bounce your ideas off of can be very, very helpful. With that in mind, I hope you find this useful, and I look forward to your comments.